There is a whole biome of Antifa adjacent and leftoid writers and podcasts. Midwest Chapo Dorkhouse is one of them, the biggest one. And there are straggler strivers from our own side who are seeking to make nice with that whole crowd and angling to redefine what went on in 2015 and 16, the whole frog phenomenon, in other words, or what used to be called the alt-right, the whole 4chan thing. They try to redefine it in leftist terms. And all of this is motivated by a desperate, dishonest desire to be seen as edgy or to look like a rebel. This whole wretched biome of the left, and their brown nosers. You cannot be a leftist, however, and also be anti-establishment. There is no matter how much you try to twist to present yourself as edgy and this, the fact remains that the Marxist left, and I mean the old Marxists, the labor left, the Stalinists even, the Maoists, in any shades of those, none of them are actually discriminated against in academia, for example. Many of them have honored positions in almost every college department, even hard sciences, but certainly the humanities, anything like that, you will always find at least one orthodox Marxist, something along these lines. And at most, they are sometimes smirked at as quaint or something like that. But none are seen as an enemy by any establishment. The attitude is, oh, you are me 1.0. They are seen as an earlier version by the dominant left. And whether you go in the college schools or in the mainstream press, where you have actually many open communists, or at Obama White House, where they put up Christmas decorations, Christmas tree decorations with Mao, or in much of the federal bureaucracy, where I personally know people very high up in some departments who are open communists, people who dream of gulags, literally, who are full of murderous rage against millions of Americans, and I exaggerate nothing at all in saying this. It is full of them. So when you see a bearded, pudgy slob who live in Brooklyn or would like to be part of that clique and who plays the Marxist rebel, they're counting on you maybe not knowing about this setup in all organs of the establishment, where in fact classical Marxists, or whatever you want to call them, in fact, they are very secure, if minority position, and their analyses are, in any case, politely used by others, including the token conservatives they sometimes rarely let in. Nothing equivalent, of course, exists for fascist or hard right. Forget it. Anything like this, you get hunted down. And these people really show themselves on immigration. I mean, on this one matter, immigration, and I'm talking now of the podcasters, the people who play the left on the internet and who would like to present themselves as rebels. But on this one matter of immigration, they show themselves. Immigration is the most important matter of all because it determines the next generation of citizens. It determines also the labor market and many other things. But the so-called dirtbag left or classical Marxists or anti-woke left, they call themselves sometimes, what have you. These leftoids in popular culture, in other words, who would like to sell themselves as anti-establishment, they are with the establishment on this one most important matter of all. They carry water for establishment. They do not oppose it, even to the level that Bernie Sanders did a few years ago.
Up to a level of open borders, about sharply increasing
open borders.
Foreign aid.
Open borders. That's a Koch brothers proposal. The idea.
And this is what really exposes them. Why was Trump attacked and boycotted by Macy's and many others? They still try to destroy him now, economically and every other way. Why to be a Trump supporter in Blue City? You get corpulent girls who chimp at you. I had one, I think I told you before, she said she was triggered when I merely mentioned that I was Russian or that I study at University of Moscow. I say nothing else. Why does this trigger them so? Why Russia hoax, unprecedented in America history, to claim that Russia determines the presidency because of his announcement that first day regarding Mexicans and immigration. That is the entire reason. Okay, and it is this one thing that is the most dear to the establishment. So if you do not oppose them on this, it's really nothing, asking for better health care or better trade deals even. Nothing upsets them as much as immigration issue. Because in the long run, it's the trump card over every other thing. And in the short run, it's their most important battering ram, their most potent battering ram against their enemy, which is the white middle class. And closely related to immigration is the race issue, on which also the so-called anti-woke or dirtbag left or the partisans of the old left, they will never oppose the establishment on race, but in fact they copy slavishly all of its orthodoxies and lies, and they repeat them only with this veneer of youthful meme language, to the point where, just to give you a small example from our own side, you had these entryists, these dorkoloids, even on our side, guys pretending to be frogs or alt-right, what have you, but who are actually Antifa, and who calls themselves the irony bros in this. And their whole line was, racism isn't cool, bro. Racism is boomer. Racism is cringe. Can't we have the frog energy and memes, but without the racism? This was their line. And no, you can't. Why not fuck off back to the left and try to get a Brooklyn apartment and you can get pats on the head from teacher? So it was all very cynical, you see, and no matter how you turn it, whether you try to dress all of this up in pseudo-Catholic garb, or whether they sell themselves as incels or misogynists or anything else, they are frightened to touch anything having to do with immigration or race. These things, most of all, they are complete frightened of, because this is the establishment's ruling religion. The orthodoxy on this, more than anything else, is their religion. So it's really the touchstone of whether you are a rebel against them at all. Can you talk about immigration and race in straightforward way? What we have on our side, what makes us different as the frogs, is that we have the truth about immigration, about race, and it's framed not from a literary or theory point of view, but from science, from biology and nature. Plus, of course, we have humor, but the true humor and satire that can only genuinely emerge when you actually provide something different, something that actually challenges a ruling religion. And I'd like on this show to tell some of you who are savable from the left, but who have been misled into joining it, maybe without realizing that you are joining one of the militias of the oligarchs and of international leftism, which is identical to the oligarchs. Actually, I don't know if I have many leftist listeners, but let's say I have one or two, and perhaps in your own life or acquaintance, somebody who's young, energetic, but dumb and seem to be attracted to Marxoid thought. Perhaps you can set them right away with... but look, I can only tell such a person that I suspect, when they are well-intentioned, that they did so out of the desire to fight, which is noble, but this desire to fight rules them. And I hope to tell such person why, in fact, you have been misled on this. It's been this desire to fight in you has been misused by the left, as also has been your compassion for the weak or the poor, which is also a noble desire that perhaps attracts some people to a somewhat leftist point of view, but that too perverted and misused by the left. The left can never be your home if these are your genuine motivations, let's say, because why left is in all ways a demonic project of human leveling and of the destruction of what is high in men. And I hope to tell you how the differences between the old left and the new woke cold left aren't really as great as you think, but how, in fact, a new left is very much continuation of old left and its aims. And one of the way some try to hide this continuity between old and the new left is through this word neoliberalism. And in our own time, this fake word, neoliberalism, is a way of denying responsibility for the left's failures. neoliberalism, an incoherent term, has shifting definitions that will confuse you or lead you dead ends if you really believe it exists. If you use casually once, or my enemy is a neoliberal, who cares? But as a tool of analysis is worthless. It adds no meaningful content to discussion of liberalism or of the left that you could not get from texts from 150 years ago. It allows young, dumb Marxoids to hide the continuity between the Marxist project and modern identity politics, which I will discuss next. And now you see this word neoliberalism even used supposedly on the hard right among Whignets, especially where its use, this fake word, its use, neoliberalism, is very cynical because it's intended to unify the dissident right with Antifa and with other anti-localist ideologies, for example, cop obsession about police and this. And the purpose of that is to ensure that more power is consolidated upwards. Neoliberalism, power structures, corporations, man, this kind of thing. No, please stop feeding this idiocy. And even, I will say, this Fed-supported idiocy. Again, if you use word casually to mean your enemies, okay, whatever, you used it once, but any serious thinking based on this dumb, fashionable word is impossible. And in any case, I will try to tell you now next on a true difference between the old and the new left. And I hope to convince some of you who have mistakenly identified yourselves with Marxism to abandon that gang and to join instead the manly populist party, the party of healthy and honest demagogues, the Caesarist party. I will be right back. Now, it is very easy, on aesthetic level at least, to argue for a difference between the old Marxist left, or what gets called the tankies, in other words, the vigorous Stalin people, the World War II Soviet soldier or NKVD cruel hard officer. But between this and the new left, could there arguably be a giant gulf at least, in terms of personality types? You know, and if that is true, what could be bigger than that? But I think this is true but misleading argument to make. You can see, however, how some can come to believe it. There are even very serious arguments by men like Yoki, who say that the Soviet Union in many ways was preferable from a rightist point of view even, that it was preferable to the liberal West. Is less corrosive, maybe you could say. You know, the Soviets did not bring in the refuse of the third world. They didn't do population replacement. Although I would add that they would have if it suited them. But the argument goes, in having to preserve militancy and the vigor of military virtue, you can see that it very much opposes the complete unloosening of the spirit and of the body that you find in the modern new left regimes. I speak now, of course, you know, the Soviet Union, this Spartoid military virtue regime, very different, right? So there is even a funny meme about this. Like, Hitler and Stalin are both in the sky, and Hitler is smirking at Stalin as they both look at what a modern left has become, with the tranny stuff, the faggot commie mobilization in pink stripes, and the various biological detritus that you see now on the left. I mean, these physical types, the face shape, and the such that you see on the Antifa mugshots from Portland. You know, if you can find any kind of lumpenprole holdover of some pre-humanoid atavistic types, if you know what I mean. But look, for all of this is right in a way, these differences, and I think but actually is a wrong argument ultimately, because the new left is in fact, with its focus on anti-white agitation and with its focus on pro-gay this and everything you know about this, is actually a superior historical understanding of Marxism and of the current material situation. The new left, in other words, has superior historical understanding to what the orthodox or the old Marxists have. Now, this may sound outrageous to you if you're a Marxoid of the classical type, and you are just disgusted by the ruling establishment, and you realize they are in hock with oligarchs and this, and you are hoping that Marxism is actually the revolt of the poor against the rich, or of the worker. But you know, that's not really what it is, and it never was. Marxism is not compassion for the poor. Marxism is an inversion of sorts of Hegelianism, which may be called scientific socialism or scientific historical materialism. And at least on outward intention, it makes very precise claims and predictions about man's nature, about the world, and about predictions about the course of capitalist economy. Now, you know, these predictions just did not come true. And this is problem Marxists have. And of course, they come up with all kind of cope argument, convoluted excuses for why Marx's economic predictions never came to be. They try to say, for example, that Marxism was not meant to be adopted by agrarian society like a Russia Empire, but instead by highly developed one like Germany. And they try to say that, and this is really what all their arguments amount to, that they were wrecked, right? That Marxism was not allowed to show what it could be because it was always sabotaged by capitalism, by outside forces. Now, I can see a fascist rightly making that argument, because fascism was indubitably destroyed from the outside. But communism lasted 70 years in the Soviet Union, was quite secure in its position for much of that time, and many decades in other places, including, by the way, East Germany, where it developed, you could say, much healthier form, maybe, than what existed in Russia. And by the way, such people who make the argument I mentioned before about how Marxism was not suited to Russia, I believe Lenin addressed many of those concerns in his writing, but these people don't read Lenin. In any case, it did exist in East Germany in much more vigorous form, you could say, than in the Soviet Union, and yet it failed in all of these places by its own inner decrepitude. And all the arguments you heard on previous shows I did about CIA and this, they are extension of this cope argument that Marxoids make to explain their failures, their atrocities, why in fact Marx's economic predictions never came to be. In other words, they have a convoluted conspiracy theory about how CIA has always been this Nazi organization that work with fascism to undermine communist or socialist movements around the world. Is complete nonsense, is not what CIA was, in fact quite the opposite. And on previous shows I tried to explain to you, in fact, how CIA many times work close with international socialism against European colonialism. But that is subject for another time. I mean to tell you that Chomskyite or other leftoid over-obsession with CIA is extension of what I just told you, a cope argument, a convoluted excuse for why leftism failed. But you know, the big irony about Marx's economic predictions, which in fact never happened, but with mass third world immigration and with outsourcing, one of Marx's most important apocalyptic predictions, you could say, is the pauperization of the proletariat, where labor becomes so cheap and the laborers of worker loses, so to speak, all hand in negotiations in society. But this is becoming true in a way, but the left, including the old left, is unwilling and unable to provide a coherent counter to these developments, because they do not want to touch immigration or race. They cannot touch that. So on the only point where Marx seems to finally be correct in our age, the old left will not touch.